I'm Trace Kerr, and I'm doing a Q&A with Ooligan Press about my debut novel, The Names We Take. And since Ooligan Press is in Portland, Oregon, and I'm in Spokane, Washington, they sent me a list of questions. So we're going to kind of go through them and read them and talk about the book. So before we get started, I should give you a little background. The Names We Take is a post-apocalyptic novel that's set in Spokane. And it's about identity and found families and hard choices. It centers around Pip, who's 17 years old, and she accidentally rescues a young girl named Iris. And it's the two of them and another girl named Fly and how they make their way through the disaster that is the world after it all falls apart. The first question, what inspired you to make Spokane the backdrop of this novel? Did you draw inspirations from specific areas while writing? Absolutely, the setting plays a huge role. For me, Spokane is almost like a character. What inspired me is, well, one, I live here. I grew up in Seattle, but I've lived in Spokane for about 14 years. And the Monroe Street Bridge, which you can see there in vintage Spokane, and then I also did a screen print of it. The arcing of the arch of the concrete and the older style of the bridge, it's an image that really sticks with me, especially how it goes over the river. It's also a really prominent landmark in Spokane. And one day I was just struck when I was downtown with the need to walk across it. And as I was standing on the bridge and I was looking out at the falls, I knew that the little idea of story that I'd been working on about how do we put it all back together when it falls apart had to be set in Spokane. And I knew that Pip in the early chapters had to run across the bridge. I didn't know how that action was going to happen, but I knew that would kind of set the tone for the story. Second question, what made you decide the catalyst of the apocalypse should be 1 Mile Cough? Okay, so 1 Mile Cough is a name that I have the Vice President of the United States giving the virus that takes out the entire population of the world to a greater extent. It's a massive pandemic. The basis for 1 Mile Cough is from the Nipah virus. In all the research that I did for the book, it was the virus that seemed like something that was the quickest moving and something that I could fictionalize to be even worse than it actually was. Given the fact that we're living through a pandemic right now, it doesn't seem quite as academic as it did when I wrote it, but that's why I chose it, is because it was something that I could make even more monstrous than it already was. Getting a little dark, but yeah, it's an apocalypse. Third question. What was the appeal of making the setting a post-apocalyptic version of the town you live in? It's not because I was like, I'm going to destroy it all. I think it's because, well, one, I live here, and I think it's important when you're writing fiction to at least have some measure of experience with what you're talking about. In some way, I was around the setting all the time. I was driving through it. My youngest child goes to high school very close to the inspiration for the music store that Pip is living in at the beginning of the book. So I was seeing these things all the time. The story begins with Pip in the downtown library, and there is an amazingly large window where you have a view of the multiple falls that run down underneath the Monroe Street Bridge. And I was standing there and I could see what the city would look like with houses burning and no one there to help. And it was just such a powerful image. That's where it all had to start. Next question, how did the human trafficking angle fit into your view of a dystopian Pacific Northwest? One of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about what happens after an apocalypse, there's all these questions about how would people react? What kind of society would be reforming? What happens when everything's gone to hell and it's completely broken? That law and order piece, which we rely on to keep things going in a safe direction, would be gone. So in The Names We Take, there are people who are trading in whatever they can get. And one of those things happens to be people. And it's not an enormous part of the story, but I thought it was important to talk about what happens when no one is there to tell you no. And we have human trafficking that happens even now, where people are snuck up and down the coast. When you stop in a rest area here, in Washington State, there are signs in the women's bathroom that say in multiple languages, if you need help, call this number. There are so many dangers that would happen, and this was one of them, and it needed to be talked about. I think it's important to look evil things in the face, because if we don't look at it, we don't have any way to try to stop it. Next question. What are some of the things you'd like to see more of in young adults? Did you add any to the names we take? And are there any that you wanted to add but couldn't? I would like to see more stories about LGBTQ queer kids, whether they are intersex or bisexual or ace or aro or non-binary. We had a long time of books where it was teens who the arc of the story was, I don't know who I am and how do I figure this out? And by the end of the book, they figured it out. And part of the reason why I wrote Pip the way I did, being a bisexual and intersex character, Fly being a lesbian character, I wanted, and my youngest child wanted, to read stories where the character is going through this crazy thing and there's action and adventure and things are going on, and they also happen to be queer. And while that might be part of the story, that isn't like all of the story. They're just a person who happens to also be queer. There is something else that I wanted to add, and it's not that I couldn't add it, we toned it back a little. I think one of the things that I look for, really yearn for in a gritty action story that post-apocalyptic or dystopian, is a realism of, like, when do people go to the bathroom and how do you take care of your wounds and things like that. And the real side that we often brush over because it's gross or it's too much, those kind of things, that the practical life stuff, it's a weird balance. And I added a lot of it. I took some of it out because there were places where they were like, really do we need to know this in this much detail? And you were probably right. But I got to leave a little bit in, so that was worth it to me. Next question. Are you a fan of apocalyptic novels? Yes. The Girl with All the Gifts. Oh my God. The Stand. I have read that book so many times. It's ridiculous. Lightning Thief. Oh my God. All of these stories that have ensemble characters, found families, where like they wouldn't have been friends or they wouldn't have been together if the world hadn't gone the way it did. In The Names We Take, it starts and there's Pip, who is 17 years old. She was homeless because she was thrown out by her parents for being not the person they wanted her to be. And she is living with a older man, probably in his late 50s, named Whistler, who is a survivor of the disease. He's ex-military, she's a teenager. They are living in circumstances where they're both supporting each other in this strong, tight friendship. Those kind of situations, I just love that. I think what I took away from like the books I mentioned is that it's gritty and it's not pretty, and there are hard choices, and sometimes you're going to have a choice where neither one is a good direction, but you have to take one. And then you have to live with the consequences. Yeah, so I'm totally a fan of apocalyptic novels. The next question, this book is all about relationships and family. Which character's relationship inspired you first? And how did this inform your decisions for the story and other friendships? I am completely fascinated with found family. I love stories that have them, like Six of Crows or Raven Boys, where it's this group of people that comes together and builds their own unit. And I started with Pip, who's 17, and Whistler, who's about 55, an older man, a military veteran. He's a survivor of the virus. People who survive the virus often experience some form of brain damage as a lasting effect. The two of them are living in the same music store, kind of a father-daughter relationship. And from there, it just kind of built outwards. Pip accidentally rescues Iris, who's 12, and brings her into the group. And then along the way, they meet a girl named Fly, and Fly and Pip, there's a definite connection between the two of them. It's kind of a slow burn, what's going to happen romance sort of feel. This family built out, and these people support each other. And even though they probably never would have known each other, that's where it grows out from there. So we're going to lead on from there. What is the significance of the relationship between Iris and Pip, and how did you conceive it? As an only child, I have tight friendships. I have one friend that I've known since kindergarten. A boy in kindergarten kissed her. She came and told me that he had kissed her and then asked me to do something about it, so I punched him. From there, a friendship was born. I have quite a few women in my life that are that kind of sisterhood forged out of circumstances. And Pip rescuing Iris, this younger girl, even though their lives are very different, we're very much the same. Pip being bisexual and intersex and trying to figure out who she is within her family, and Iris being Chinese and adopted by a white family, which is quite common here in the United States and in Spokane. Both of them have similar thoughts and issues about life that they've had to deal with, and throwing the two of them together just seems like something that I wanted to explore. Are there any characters that you put a little of yourself into? I think there's a little bit of me in every single character. I mean, what are you building out from? You're building out from yourself. Even the characters that are not necessarily the heroes of the story have aspects of me in them. Veronica, who leads Thistle Hill Orchard, is rigid and uncompromising and judgmental, but she's also in some ways kind and thoughtful and trapped in a place, and I can be just as rigid as she can. I have my bisexuality in Pip. I hope I have some of the grit and the kick-assness that is in Fly. I definitely have large pieces of my dad in Whistler. Pip is the person I think I am most close to being, and I think Fly is the person that I would most want to be like. So kind of a follow-up to that, and our last question, who was the easiest character for you to write, and who was the hardest? The hardest character for me to write was Granville. Granville is a cowboy, a full-blooded American man of the kind that is not a great person. And I think the hardest thing about Granville was in early drafts, he was a caricature of a very bad person. He was just doing these bad things and we were going to hate him, and that was easy. And then when we started editing, the questions that came coming back to me was, but why is he doing this? Why is he acting this way? And making Granville more human, diving into the reasons for why he would do something, even though, you can say, wow, that's really bad, what has been done. Finding the side of, yes, but why would he do it, was extremely hard. I'm glad I did it. It's work that I think made his character deeper and the story deeper, but he was very hard to write. And the easiest, what's funny is the easiest was Whistler. I can't wait for you to meet him. Right after Pip, he was the easiest person for me to imagine. When you create characters, I think sometimes people are like, well, I want these kind of attributes, and then they create this person. For me, Whistler was, I woke up from a dream and he was there, and I knew who he was, and I knew what he looked like, and I knew what he would do, and I knew why he would do it, and he just flowed onto the page. So I hope you enjoyed those questions and answers. I know I did. I wanted to tell you that you can find The Names We Take anywhere you buy books. I'd love it if you'd support your local bookstores. Like, we have Auntie's Books here in Spokane, and we also have Wishing Tree Books, or over in Portland, there's Annie Bloom's and Powell's. They're not open, but we can still support them, and we can support them with our, buying my book. I mean, come on, let's be honest. So thank you again for listening and watching, and I hope you stay safe. Bye.